Well, thank you, ladies, for coming today. Thank you, ladies. I expected you to be here. No. Really appreciate it very much. Um, well, let's see what we need to do. Of course, you're both familiar with the first book because you've had the first book and read the first book. I don't know how familiar you are with the second book. This came out during the big quarantine, the big COVID quarantine, and we thought we would never get it out of New York. They had a hard time getting it printed and then getting it packed and then getting it shipped, and so that was really interesting. Um, but finally we did get it. During that quarantine period was when I worked on the third book, and so um, I tell you what, have you both read the second book? Anybody not familiar with the second book? No, you haven't read the second book? Well, I was just going to read you a little bit about, of course, the first book is about the three women that escaped the stockade during the Cherokee removal. The second book, and I'll just read this last little blurb on here about it. River Sisters, the Receiver, traces the heritage of culture and courage passed by Nancy Hildebrand, protagonist of River Sisters, the Giver, to her great-granddaughter, Eliza McNeil. A mere whit of rawhide, tough, independent, yet compassionate, Eliza is one of the first female rural free delivering mail carriers. Riding horseback 12 hours a day through rugged terrain, crossing creeks, avoiding ruts and potholes that can break a horse's leg, she is responsible for postal service along the legendary Trail of Tears. Eliza is the eldest of three sisters who face serious personal and familial challenges as they stake their lives and fortunes on the banks of the Tennessee River, not only the ancient's giver of life, but the receiver of lives caught in its tumultuous currents and depths. So the main character of this book is the great-granddaughter of Nancy in the first book. The character in this book is taken somewhat from my great aunt, our great aunt, Ethel, who, beginning at the age of 16, carried mail on horseback on the Trail of Tears. She was one of the last known living.
A mule.
You'll have to excuse me. In the area. Was it a mule? She rode a mule. I'm sorry, she rode a mule. The newspaper article said horse, so they kind of. Oh, okay. So she rode a mule on horseback carrying the mail. She's a pretty tough character. And I was just showing a picture I had today of Great Aunt Ethel. Of course, I had told somebody, I said, I kind of glamorized her, romanticized her and all this in my book. But then I saw a picture that her grandson had of her when she was about the age of Eliza, the character here. She was beautiful. She was just the way I pictured her. And of course, we only knew her as an older, much older woman. She lived to be nearly 100. But anyway, that's the second book. Then, as I said, during the Oh, okay. Well, wait. Well, hi there. Hi. I'm fine. How are y'all doing? So I think these ladies are familiar with the second. You're familiar with the second book, aren't you? Okay. So I was just for those who were not familiar with it, I was kind of giving them a synopsis of what the book's about. So during COVID, I was working on this book, which brings the family up to the second book comes up to 1912, is where it began. This brings the family up to before World War I. So 1941. I'm sorry, World War II. I'm sorry, World War II. 1941. And I'll just read this little blurb. River Sisters, The Strangers completes the River Sisters trilogy. Great-granddaughter of Nancy Hildebrand, Eliza McNeil, who took the mail, with her husband and former riverboat pilot Josh, are settled in their city home, enjoying the blessings and challenges of rearing teenage children. Nancy Jewell, namesake of her foremother Hildebrand, and John Henry, better known as Hank, named in remembrance of Eliza's father. Story revolves around the lives of these youths and their closest friends, a trio of couples, typical teenagers, and young adults of the time and culture of post-Depression America. And what was interesting, I'll tell you just a little bit about this. When I was doing this, I'll just tell you, the main character, or a main character, is getting ready to go to college. She's getting ready to go to the University of Chattanooga at the time. That was in September of 1941. And remember, I'm writing this during the big quarantine. In September of 1941, there was a big quarantine in Chattanooga. The schools, businesses shut down, everything was delayed because of polio. And so when I was kind of doing some research, I thought, well, that is really ironic, isn't it, that I'm in quarantine while I'm writing this about quarantine. Also, the publisher thought I might want one that would the cover would kind of follow this pattern. Well, this one came out during the big quarantine in New York. When it came out, it was a different size. Already they didn't match, and I wasn't happy about it. But the covers were similar. So when on this one, he thought, well, you'll want a cover to kind of go with these covers. I said, no, I have something different in mind. He said, well, don't you want them to match? And I wanted to say, well, the first two don't match anyway, size-wise. So this is about three young couples before teenagers, young college age. Pearl Harbor hits, and they have to grow up overnight. And so this picture right here is a picture of my dad and his best friend, 1942, 41, 42, that time. My dad's the one on top. His friend played football. This picture is a picture of my mom and her cousin and her sister, about the same period of time. And the story's about three young couples. Well, here are three young couples, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. This was actually the student council of Red Bank High School in 1942, and my dad is the good-looking guy on the right. So that's a little bit about the background of the three books. And do you have any questions about that, or be happy to answer questions? Well, last time, if y'all were here, I did a reading from this book. This book's about mountain people, of whom I am one, and he is too.
Not me.
Not him. You can tell that that's my brother. See, my hair's on the top, and his is on the bottom down here, so.
You're a mountain person, I'm a river.
If I let yeah, I'm of the mountain, and he's of the river. If I let my beard grow, we'd look more alike. I think I'm going to maybe pass on a reading from this one. There's a reading that I have done before. It's kind of dreary, though, isn't it? It's kind of a downer. I don't think I'll do that. And it's also about the mountain people. Well, this book, they've become a little more cityfied. And so I thought I would ask my husband to come do a reading from this book. I think you'll enjoy it very much if he does. So would you like to come? You have to come sit, Brian said, so you have to sit right here.
I'm really honored that she's asked me to do this. But, I don't know why, though, she did. Let me get to this. Okay. This is the first day of the junior year in high school, 1941. Cassie and Lee took desks beside each other 3 rows from the front. When Hank appeared at the door, he glanced at the girls and took a seat behind Alex Gentry, who was near the entrance where Mr. Sanders stood. Closing the door behind Betty Malone, the teacher proceeded to the front of the room as he directed the class, "Please be seated and give me your attention." The students settled and became attentive at the authoritative resonance of his deep voice. "I am Mr. Philip Sanders, your homeroom teacher. You will begin your days with me in this room. I trust that won't get you off to a bad start," he smiled. "Every morning we will begin, of course, with the Pledge of Allegiance and an inspirational thought for the day that I hope will circulate through your minds from time to time as you go about your activities." Cassie caught Lee's attention, rolled her eyes, and wrinkled her nose. Lee responded with a sly smile and turned to check on Hank's reaction. She happened to catch his unsmiling eyes looking at her before he returned his attention to Mr. Sanders' words. The brief interaction left her feeling somehow chastised. Mr. Sanders said, "Please stand and address the flag." The students stood and, hands over hearts, recited with Mr. Sanders, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States." As she spoke by rote, Lee glanced again at Hank and noticed his apparent concentration on the flag and the words. His seriousness struck her as a bit odd, even out of place among this group of teenagers. Hearing the final words, indivisible with liberty and justice for all, Lee sat down and waited for Mr. Sanders to continue with his inspirational message. She wondered what words he might find that had the power to inspire her and everyone else in the class day after day for an entire school year. With an air of solemnity and dignity, Mr. Sanders took a thick, leather-bound book from his desk and announced, "Let me read this far too lengthy but famous first sentence of a novel that some of you may study this year in English literature." Mr. Sanders' voice was beautiful in its deep, rich tones as he began. "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way." Mr. Sanders suddenly slapped the book closed and declared, "That one sentence goes on for another 34 words. Though Mr. Dickens describes the period of the French Revolution, it seems to me his words are an apt description of the period of teenage known as the junior year." He placed the book back on the desk and looked up with a grin at the quizzical faces of his class. Mr. Sanders chuckled. "Believe it or not, I was once a teenager. I know the ups, the best of times, and the downs, the worst of times that come with being in that amorphous stage between childhood and adulthood. This junior year will be busy, full of preparation for graduation, and perhaps for making choices that will affect the rest of your adult life. I'm not just here to call roll and make announcements, but to be a good listener, a helper, even a confidant should you need one. Ours will be a relationship of mutual respect. I always will enforce the rules, but I will be a fair and impartial sounding board if needed. Can we work together on that basis?" Mr. Sanders waited until he was satisfied with the yes-sirs and nodding of heads. Taking the roll book, he directed, "When I call your name, raise your hand and I will give you your class schedule." He added wryly, "A word of warning. I'll see several of you again later in the day for world history." That would have been a warning to me, I guarantee you. Then we go to the first day of the rest of their lives. December 7th, 1941, 8 p.m. Josh Hodge answered the knock at the front door and opened it to find Les Thompson, cap in hand, pacing as he awaited a response. "Les, come in. I assume you heard about the attack." "Yes, sir. That's why I'm here. I wanted to talk to Hank." "Sure, come along. He's back in the den. We were just listening to the reports coming in, though there's not much detail yet. What we do here doesn't sound good." "No, sir. The Japanese have been hard at it, even while their envoys were here, talking peace. This morning, Hank and I were upset about your not making the All-Stars. I guess all this war talk has put that in perspective." Josh added, "We hadn't turned the radio on this afternoon, so we didn't even hear about the attack till we got to the building for worship this evening." We had a prayer service, and I don't think any people prayed harder or louder than we prayed this evening. Josh went to the window looking out over the backyard and stood, hands in pockets, to listen to the disturbing news. "Hey, Les." Hank motioned for Les to take a seat near the radio. "There's a report just now coming through from some reporter up on the roof of a building in Honolulu." Hank checked the accuracy of the tuner and increased the volume as a reporter read, "I am speaking to you from Honolulu, where for 3 hours a fierce attack, undoubtedly by the Japanese, has been going on against the United States military base at Pearl Harbor. The city of Honolulu also has been heavily damaged. I have a view of the severe bombing from my vantage point. However, I have no details on the extent of the destruction or the specific targets that have been hit. All residents of Honolulu have been advised to seek shelter in their homes or in places of safety away from the military installations. We will update as we can. This is real. We are at war on the land and on the sea." The station returned to the music of the Philharmonic. The deceptive tranquility of the music was broken by Les. "Hank, I'm enlisting in the Army tomorrow. They're going to need all the men they can get. I want to serve, and I figure they'll be lowering the draft age before long. I want to go. I want to go to them before they come for me." Josh turned to hear Hank's response. "Yeah, Les, I understand, but I won't even be 17 until March." Josh could feel the increasing pressure in his chest and the breathlessness that had afflicted him so many weeks ago. He reached for the case in his pocket and turned back toward the window to avoid detection while placing a small pill under his tongue. He tried to maintain his composure as he moved toward the fireplace to sit in one of the armchairs. Les responded, "I know. I just wanted you to know what I intend to do. I don't know what that means for me about graduation. Maybe they'll delay me until June. Or maybe I can finish half a year early, though I don't have the grades or credits your sister had." "Well, I have the grades and the credits. Maybe Mr. McConnell will recommend me for an early out," Hank replied. "Son," Josh's breath was shallow, "please, just wait this out. You should graduate with your class, then make that kind of decision. Dad, I'll be 17 in 3 months. I don't know where this war will be then, but I want to be ready. This country is going to need every man fit to serve." His mind raced with his pulse as Josh contemplated the boy, his son, who was transforming before his eyes into a man with purpose and determination. "Son, I can't lose you like Morgan lost Caleb. Dad, Uncle Morgan, and Aunt Mattie grieved, but Caleb was a decorated hero, and they have hope of seeing him again when this life is over. We talk about having faith, but the time comes when we have to prove it." Josh wanted to shout and demand obedience, but how could he argue with Hank? How could he deny the courage and conviction of the two he saw before him? He had wanted to forge his son into a man of maturity and responsibility, a man of strength, spiritual character, leadership. Now a potentially devastating war had realized that goal far too soon. "But son, you're not even 17, Josh repeated, pleading. Eliza entered the room and caught Josh's last few plaintive words. Nodding a greeting to Les, she asked, "What's going on, Josh?" Nancy followed behind Eliza, but stopped at the entrance, not wanting to enter the cloud of anxiety that seemed to pervade the den. "Mom, Les is going to enlist, and I want to enlist with him," stated Hank. "I know I won't be 17 until March. They may not take me for months, even years, but I want to make the commitment." Eliza dropped into the armchair facing Josh. She weighed her words before speaking. "And Josh, what do you say?" With resignation, Josh said again, "Eliza, he's not even 17. He should graduate first, and then see where we are in this war." Hank interrupted. "Mom, what if I can finish early like Nancy? What then? Would you give me permission to serve?" Eliza remembered herself at 16 and the determination to prove herself strong and capable, riding horseback on the trail with saddlebags sometimes half her weight. When she thought about her mother's concern and her own fearlessness at that age, she understood her son, but also her husband, and her own longing to turn back time. Where was the baby she had nursed, the toddler she had shielded from his sisters eagerly? overly energetic love. The teenager she only recently had advised about girls and dating. She noticed Les, who seemed uncomfortable in the midst of this family discussion. She appreciated his quiet reserve and retreat from interference. Eliza spoke in words measured in understanding of both her husband and her son. Hank, I understand, and I am proud of you and Les for your conviction and patriotism, but also I understand your father's concern, and I share his concern. Morgan and Madeline have been where your father and I are, and they endured the worst possible outcome of Caleb's decision. They grieved mightily at his death. Granted, likely they're stronger people for the faith that sustained them and continues to sustain them. This decision is one for you to make, but only with your father's blessing. Of course, whenever you come of age, any decision and its consequences are your responsibility. Josh listened to his wife's words and remembered the vibrance and daring of the young Eliza. At Hank's age, she had plunged headlong into her chosen work, willing to accept the difficulties, even the perils that might come with it. How could he deny Hank this challenge any more than he had been able to deny Eliza when she was determined to ride the trail even after they were married? All waited for Josh's response. When he spoke, he said, "If you can graduate early, like your sister, I will support your decision when you are of age to be accepted for enlistment." "Thanks, Dad," was Hank's simple reply. Every book's, from my perspective, it's been wonderful, but as this is wonderfuler.
Wonderful.
I think this is the capping. It has not gone downhill. It's gone. If anything, it's even better, I think. I read this before it was published, but then I read it again the other day in 2 days' time. And it's, yeah. She, I'm very proud of her. Very proud of her. Yeah. And it's got just so much, it has so many good moral messages, all of them do, and this caps it really too. And so much that I think our world needs right now, very much so. And it's all wholesome, but at the same time, there are principles here that, need to be adapted and are tragically sorely lacking in a lot of our society. So, anyway, back to you.
The best of times is when that voice is reading something I've written. And so I know you enjoyed it because I enjoyed it. So, what was that? Are you being?
He wants to know if I can read it to him.
I kind of like to read it to me.
Well, does anybody have any questions or, Somebody asked me if, I think it was James Howard asked me if these characters were taken from people I know, and some are. It's kind of like having a movie going in your head, and you have people who have been in your realm of experience, even family members or people and you just kind of put them. They're the cast of characters. Okay, I'm going to let you play this person, and you're going to play this person, and so forth. But anyway, I really appreciate you're making the effort to be here today, and you're coming over. I appreciate that so much.
We had a lot more grandchildren here. 2 of them weren't sick, and the others are stranded in Harriman, Tennessee after a breakdown with their vehicle.
We would have had 7 grandchildren here, but 2 sick, 3 in Harriman, and 2 that made it to our house but had to go back to Harriman to pick up the ones who were stranded.
They're going to try to get here.
So,
to
yeah.
something over here, maybe, if they can.
Maybe, yeah, they'll try to get here. Well, is there anything else you would like to
Y'all are welcome to
do?
food or any other books that Jan's got if you don't have.
No, I think all of these people have been great as far as obtaining books. They appreciate it very much. So